Ngā koe, Mr Chair. Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm really glad to take a call on this bill. Last week in Whanganui, I launched a leaflet in support of the rights of beneficiaries. And I launched it with the Whanganui People Centre and the Disability Resource Centre. And the people there were very glad that for once somebody was getting up and saying something positive about their human rights, about the fact that they pay taxes, the fact that they contribute in their local economies, that many of them are doing a great job as volunteers caring for elderly family members and for children, and they are very tired of being told there is something very wrong with actually doing that. We never talk in this House about wealth dependency, which is another issue. We talk a lot about what's wrong with the poor. But I want to be quite specific and talk about the bill today, because that's what we're here to do, and also to mention, I would agree with the previous speaker that the real debate is not being had. I wouldn't agree with his conclusions or perhaps his rhetoric, but the real debate is, can we get outside blame and look at the causes of poverty in a realistic way? And can we start talking, if an economist like Gareth Morgan can talk about the need for universal basic income as a possible idea, can we really talk about something like that, whether it's the best way to deliver it or not, instead of insisting on finding out who's to blame for the fact that the welfare system costs me as a taxpayer money, and I am happy to pay, because I want to live in a decent society, in a civilised society, where people who are looking at the vulnerable and people who are looking after kids are worth something. So why don't we put the benefit up, Mr Chair, if we think people are too poor, instead of starting to attack beneficiaries? After 4 years in Tairāwhiti dealing with WINS, I'm afraid that the Minister's description of what WINS might do with this bill is a fantasy. The reality is, on the ground, we have overworked staff and we have many, many people coming in the door who suffer from beneficiary abuse. And it's not always the staff's fault. We actually have to change the culture in our society if we want WINS to deliver fairness and justice. But let's get on to the specifics of the bill. The sickness beneficiaries in particular are under the gun. In Clause 31, the bill provides for a reduction of a work-tested benefit by 50% if a beneficiary fails to comply with a work test. Now, the Minister said, of course, that will only be if you're not seen to be looking for work. Now, how on earth is that going to be defined by a case manager? If someone says they're looking for work, are they going to disbelieve them? If there is no work to be found, like there is in places like the East Coast, what are they going to do? How are they going to decide whether a person is the deserving poor or the undeserving poor? And we already have a punishing culture towards beneficiaries. We know that. Anyone who's worked in the field knows that. Other provisions in the bill proposed that will apply to sickness beneficiaries who are assessed as able to undertake part-time work, but if they fail to meet work and incomes requirements, they're in trouble. Now, if you take 50% away from a sickness beneficiary who is already struggling, especially when GST is about to go up, what are you left with? A young man came into our office when I was an advocate and said, can you help me get some kind of benefit? Otherwise, I'm going out to do a burglary. That's how desperate it was. And you can romanticise the work and income experience and say that they're there to facilitate people getting appropriate work. I'm sorry, Mr Chair, that's not what happens. That's not what happens on the ground. And now that we've got 60% of Māori unemployment on the East Coast of the total employment figure, we know that's not what happens to people. We also know that doctors are being encouraged to see sickness beneficiaries as work ready, and if they make one statement like, oh, they could do a few hours a day, do you know where those people can end up? Well, I do, because I worked there even before this bill. People with epilepsy in the fields picking capsicums, having epileptic fits in the fields. People with morbid obesity being told they could stand all day on a cool store floor. That's what part-time work readiness means on the East Coast in work and income. Let's be honest. If you cut people's money who are sick, you're not going to make them better. And if you don't find the right work, and if you don't invest in disability, which we're not going to be able to create an environment where those people who want to work, because who wants to be called lazy, bludger, loser, bottom of the heap beneficiary? No one does, because it has no status, even though some of us try to give respect for those people, even though some of us work for that respect for those people. They would like to work, but not at the expense of their families and their health. And as we've seen with ACC, medical opinions about a person's capacity for work can vary. They can vary from practitioner to practitioner, from day to day, from week to week, given that people with chronic illnesses have good days and bad days, just like politicians do. Although often you wonder how many good days in this place when you start talking about punishing the poor further. A designated doctor sees only a snapshot of a person's health on the day of the consultation and is more likely to get it wrong. That's the designated doctor. They have a bias towards saying it's great for people's health to go out to work. Not if you're sick, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair.
Catherine Delahunty.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, the designated doctor gets it wrong. And even a person's regular GP, especially if under pressure of suggestion from Work and Income's regional health advisor as to the beneficiary's capacity for work, can also get it wrong. Who pays for that? Everybody in the end pays. If we send unfit people into a workplace where there are no jobs, or we say they're not looking hard enough and cut their benefit by 50%. So if the medical assessor gets it wrong, the beneficiary is subject to the work test and fails the work test, not because of any fault of their own, but because the assessment was wrong in the first place. Track it back. It's all very well for the Minister to say that the beneficiary has the right of appeal to a medical appeal board over the decision to work test and a right of review to the subsequent decision. But the Medical Appeal Board and Benefits Review Committee hearings take a long time to organise. Frequently they don't happen within a month of the appeal. The beneficiary may also need to obtain a second opinion from a specialist to support his or her contention of being unfit to work. Sometimes it might take a month to get to see a specialist. So in the meantime, what are people living on? And what's happening to their state of confidence about their ability to pay their bills? Not to mention their children. The appeals process is good for people who know how to appeal. Sometimes the most vulnerable beneficiaries are not literate. So what is their capacity to appeal? And I know there aren't advocates all over this country because there's only a few of those people who can advocate for those people. So an illiterate person fills out an appeal form and then waits to see a specialist. Hello, that is what's going to happen. In the meantime, under Clause 31 of the bill, the person's benefit will have been reduced to zero, not because he or she didn't comply with the work test, but because the work test was wrongly imposed in the first place. So I have to say to the Minister, what's going to happen? What are you going to do to prevent this from happening? Are there going to be directions that sanctions are not to be imposed on sickness beneficiaries who are contesting the imposition of a work test? That would be really interesting to know, because otherwise we are penalising these people before they've had a chance to establish whether in fact they're ready for work or not. Or are we content to sit back and see beneficiaries lose their homes, sell off their possessions, or be forced into crime and prostitution? Because that's what Clause 31 will do to sickness beneficiaries who are wrongly subjected to a work test. So we have to go into the minutiae here and look at what happens on the front line every day. You have to walk into Work and Income. Outside Ruatoria Work and Income, my organisation saw 50 people too scared to walk through that door. And that was before this bill came in. And those people were intimidated because of the risk that if they said the wrong thing, if they hadn't brought the right paperwork, or they weren't sufficiently literate, they could lose a benefit that they need to survive, because there are not thousands of jobs at Ruatoria. Well, the Ruatoria staff might do their best, but in the end those people were intimidated by the system, and that system is not set up to support those people. There are many people who go into Work and Income with a multiplicity of issues, and they need to be defended and protected by the law of the land, as do the staff. They all are victims here if we have a punishing and blaming system. We can do different. We can do a lot different. We can start creating real work appropriate to people. But it's not going to work if we start from the premise that punishment and sanctions inspires change. It inspires despair, and it inspires manipulation, and it inspires anger. It doesn't inspire the idea that all of us, no matter what our economic status, no matter what our state of health or well-being, is valuable. We need to live in a society that values all people and allows us to have time when we do things that don't always bring in money. As a parent, it's so important that you can be home for your kids. On the one hand, we say, get the kids off the street. On the other hand, we say, we're going to cut your benefit if you are not showing sufficient, relentless work focus to find a job. So we can't legislate these contradictions and expect to have the respect of the people of this country if that's how we're going to approach this issue. We need a new and fresh debate about how we're going to create real living wages, affordable benefits and affordable jobs. Because to get a job, you actually need to have resources. You need to have the ability to travel in rural areas. You need to have clothes that are suitable for your workplace. And in order to